Hello everyone, welcome to the Twimbit Youth Summit. It's so exciting to be back after the smashing success we had with the first group. Today we have a new set of panelists and a new set of topics. Before we begin, I'd like to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Sham? Tell us something about yourself and introduce us to the topic we'll be talking about today.
Sure. So I'm Sham and I'm going to be talking about big tech. So I'm currently in Melbourne and I'm currently in a stage 4 lockdown right now, which means I really can't leave my house.
Joao?
So I'm Joao and I'm based in Singapore right now, and I'll be talking a little bit about corporate learning. So that covers everything from new employee training to employee development. Yeah.
So I'm Sohana. I'm in my last year of high school, and today I will be discussing giving my insight on the future of the fashion industry.
Hello everybody, my name is Avigna. I study at Marlborough College, Malaysia, and I'm 16 years old. Today I'll be talking about supply chain management in healthcare.
Hello everybody, my name is Ashira. I'm 17 years old, and today I'll be talking about the collaboration of the commercial food and beverage industry with the delivery industry.
Hey guys, I'm Raj. I'm a sophomore at SMU studying economics. Today I'll share my views upon millennial banking.
Thank you very much, guys. It's so good to hear from you. This project is such a special project. It gives a chance to the youth to share their views and ideas about industries of their choice. Our current panelists have been working over the past month to research and gain a coherent understanding in the possibilities for the future of their various industries. For me, I'd be interested to know from you guys, what is the reason behind choosing the topics you have today? So let's begin with Sham again.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of why I chose this topic is because it is something that has grown tremendously. If we look 50 years ago, for example, let's look at the space, for example. The only actors that could send things into space or so on were actual nation states because, no other firm had the actual resource. However, this year, we saw the most powerful, economically powerful state on the world rely on a private organization to send them into space. So that just shows how powerful tech is actually, turned out to be. So yeah, I just thought, sure.
Thanks, Sham. Joao?
So over the past few years, I've come to be really quite passionate about education. And one thing that I saw that I thought was, often quite overlooked was education in the corporate environment. I think typically people will regard conventional education as just, a finite process that ends after you finish, either high school or university or however far you may want to go in the conventional education system. But I think actually it's an infinite process, and it continues very far beyond what we consider to just be school. And a large part of that takes place in the sort of corporate environment. And so I thought that was really important to address. And so that's what I decided to look at.
So my dad's actually, his business is in the fashion industry, and I've sort of been exposed to it ever since I was young, but not really so much that I've been able to explore it in great detail. So I thought this would be a really great opportunity to see what the future of the fashion industry would be like.
So I'm fairly interested in the healthcare industry. I'm fairly passionate in it. And I feel that supply chains as a whole, they play a fairly big part in a lot of the industries that you may come across in everyday life. I'd say that the success of a lot of industries, they depend upon the efficiency of the supply chains. So I feel that perhaps bringing some light to some of the challenges and trends that exist in supply chain management for the healthcare industry may perhaps, it's something that I'm fairly passionate about, and it might help myself and others understand more about how the healthcare industry as a whole functions.
So it seems obvious at this time that everybody keeps on saying that the food delivery industry is really booming right now, and it's really helping local restaurants. However, I tried to think about it properly. Is it really helping local restaurants, or is it actually harming them? And that led to this project.
For me, I just see myself in the banking industry after a few years, and with the current drastic change happening in it, I thought being a millennial, what's better than speaking about it? So yeah.
Ria.
Ria, you're on mute.
Sorry, everyone. So today, before we begin, we're going to start with a rapid fire round. This is all about getting some ideas and starting to bounce off of each other. Today is all about collaboration and discussion. In that spirit, I encourage you to post your comments and questions throughout this summit. As we go through our panelists' answers to these questions, I encourage you to also reflect on what your answers to these questions might be and how they might differ to our panelists' answers today. So, let's begin. Do you see yourself becoming a major thought leader in your industry? Has COVID-19 had a positive influence for change in your industry? Is human interaction a major factor in your industry? Is sustainability a key factor when making decisions about products and services you consume? Do you think that the youth is the primary consumer in your industry today? Thank you very much, guys. So let's get started with a little bit of discussion and let's start bouncing off of each other. I'd be interested to know, Raj, since you answered that you don't really consider sustainability a key factor when you make decisions about products and services you consume, I'd be interested to know why that is and what do you think could help you change your mind about this decision?
Sure, so I'll sound incredibly selfish and like a hypocrite when I say this. Although I know sustainability is the future, it's the main factor that's changing the success of the future generations. But I, as an individual, I'm not willing to go that extra mile via monetary cost to ensure sustainability. Like, I can't carry metal cutlery or pay an extra dollar to reduce plastic consumption. So that's why I feel for me individually, I don't think sustainability matters that much.
Now, Raj, now you're speaking, but from the consumer view, right? Let's say, we're talking about, the firms which you are actually looking at now. Would you say, because, your main sector, which actually is targeting your consumers, tend to be younger people, and the whole concept of environmentalism and so on, right? That is becoming very, very, very in for these young people. So would your firm as a whole have to change the way you market yourself to kind of suit these,
I see your question. I feel banking as a whole is not something that has that big, say, a carbon footprint because it's mostly digital. With times changing, cash is going away, cards are coming in, and in further years, you're going to see plastic cards go away as well. So banking as a whole has not had that big an impact on the environment. But in general, I would say, yes, 90% of the people want sustainability. But again, 50% are not willing to go that extra mile. So yeah.
I think it's interesting that Sean brought that up because the fashion industry, on the other hand, is a huge contributor to the increasing global warming. It's the most destructive business sector and the world's second offender when it comes to water pollution. And I think it's responsible for almost 10% of carbon emissions. And so one key factor that's going to be changing after coronavirus is that more consumers are going to be looking for more sustainable products. So that's how it's sort of the question about how do firms cater to that demand.
So Hannah, would you say that the take back programs that a lot of the fast fashion companies are introducing right now, would you say that they're a fairly a good effort towards becoming more sustainable as firms as a whole? Would you say that perhaps they're not as efficient as they might like to be?
I think it's an interesting point because earlier before Sham had brought up the point, I think yesterday when we were discussing about do I see big firms or smaller firms being more able to change to more sustainable supply chains. And at first, I actually thought it would be small firms. But after doing a bit more research, I actually did realize that I think it will be larger firms that will be able to do so, because they're the ones that have the capability to switch their, like satisfy the demands of consumers wanting things to be more sustainable. And I just think that although maybe that's not what I personally thought, actually I do realize now that larger firms are going to be able to do so.
Would you say that the sort of the brand reputation that the big firms have plays a big role in sort of upholding this image of sustainability?
That is interesting, because on the other hand, a lot of large companies and brands have an image of not really paying their workers enough or exploiting their workers. And another key factor that's going to change after COVID-19 is that consumers want to know that the brands that they're buying from are treating their workers right. So not only will they need to be more sustainable, but more they need to be like ethically moral as well. So I think it's like, on one hand, they need to be more sustainable, but on the other hand, they need to also be treating their workers rightly. So like, I don't really know what's going to happen, but I think it's interesting to wait a couple of years and see what's going to happen.
Yep, I agree. Oh, Ria, you're muted.
Sorry again, guys. Keeps happening. I'll be more careful. I have a question for Ashira. As Sahana has mentioned, COVID-19 has become a huge factor in increasing the rate of growth and change in industries. So I'm interested to ask Ashira, we've seen that food and beverage delivery companies, they've started adopting contactless delivery systems. Do you see this as something that will continue beyond COVID? Is this a change that we see lasting? Or do you think that people would very much want to revert to our old system of delivery as we put COVID in our past?
So there really are two ways for this to go. So one, people are craving human interaction at this point, just like in Sean's case, where he hasn't really interacted with people in a while. So they might bring back that element more in the future. However, because consumers are now more comfortable with the practice of contactless payments and where to just leave your food outside and just go and pick it up, that might also continue. So I see sort of like a mix of that in the future.
Thank you, Ashira. We have a question from one of our viewers now. This is quite an open-ended one, so whoever has an answer ready or thinks they have a great idea to share with us, feel free to jump in as you're ready. Do you think that major business leaders should be expressing their political views?
I would say no. The reason why that actually is because if we look at these giant tech firms, whatever service one firm will provide, there'll always be the exact same service being provided in a new firm somewhere else in the world, right? So let's say we have the CEO of this company. Let's take Elon Musk, right? I think it was a few months ago. He sent a tweet out, and it was about how people were trying to cope with the virus and so on, and it wasn't a very far right or far left view, but the fact is that what that view meant was that some people weren't going to agree with the view. Now maybe 60% will, but however, there'll still be these consumers that think, okay, I don't like this view. And as I said in the start, that whatever service this firm will provide, there'll always be this new firm that can give the exact same thing. That means that consumers, maybe not all, maybe even it's a few 5-10% can actually make that switch, which is why I think they should just
Wait, Sham, as maybe like a follow-up or a sort of a counter argument to that point, what about the sort of the argument of freedom of expression and whatnot? And would you sort of say that maybe it should be their personal choice because they might recognize what you're saying and they don't want to provoke consumers to switch firms, but maybe they should it should be left to their own sort of personal choice? What do you think?
I mean, yeah, that is a good point. I mean, at the end of the day, it should be. Let's keep in mind these people when they think. realistically, what is the biggest objective for a firm? You want to make money, you want to retain money, right? And what that means is that if there's even a small chance, even a 5% chance that I say something which people aren't going to actually like, then I mean, in my opinion, we just shouldn't say it. I mean, yes, I see what you mean. I could say a view that's far left, and maybe all my consumers, which are far left, absolutely love that view. But how about if I said that, and how would everyone on the far right actually think about that? So I would say overall, no.
Thanks, Sham. I think it's undeniable that this is and now is a huge time for this question to be asked. Now more than ever, we see that it's so easy to share your political views and talk to other people and spread the word about causes that you believe in. And I think we all experienced it very recently when we saw the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement after the death of George Floyd. And this is quite a touchy subject, and it was really important for a lot of people that large businesses use their voice to spread the word. Do you think this is something that people shouldn't have done? Is it supposed to be business stays as business? Or do you think that when it comes to certain things, we have to put that aside and bring forward our voices?
I think in a case. Go ahead.
You can go.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think that MNCs nowadays, I think it's difficult for them to not be political or express their political views. Just to the extent of which they have grown in the 21st century, it's quite difficult. And like when I think of it from the fashion industry's point of view, the fashion industry is catering to the new generation of consumers, and this new generation of consumers are really want to see an inclusive culture, and they're they're very like they want to know what the company's beliefs are. So I feel like to cater to that new generation of consumers, that they sort of have to express their views, no matter if it's going to turn out good for them or bad.
I agree with Sohana because right now I do see with the youth, the trend is that people are more empathetic to workers at every level. And that is also being exposed in my industry to see if these gig economy workers are actually being paid a fair amount, just like in the fashion industry, and I'm sure in all of our other industries.
Thank you very, very much, guys. It's so interesting to hear your views, and it's so great to see that we're continuing to get questions from our audience. So let's keep moving. We have another question. Do you think that with the current situation with regards to the pandemic, do you think this calls for major disruption and growth in your industry?
I feel this doesn't only just call for a major disruption. The call has been made. The banking industry has seen a radical change in the past few months. Earlier, customers wanted things to go digital. They wanted every end-to-end digitalization. But due to the pandemic, due to the lockdown throughout different countries, banks had no option. If they wanted to serve their customer, they had to go digital. So I feel it's come as a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, it's the same with.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Go first. So it's the same with the supply chain management industry. As a whole, the pandemic has caused a lot of disruption, and it calls for a lot of tech to be integrated into the industry. A lot of manual inventory systems are now being made automated. So in terms of growth and the integration of tech, it's certainly sort of sped it up in the industry. And furthermore, there's been more integration of big data. So essentially, industries are planning to sort of make the disruption even less in the future, in future pandemics and future sort of events that might occur.
Thank you, guys. Furthering on with a trend that has been brought about by COVID-19, is contactless bringing a new trend into your industry, or is it something that you're seeing more in other industries that doesn't so much apply to you?
As I've mentioned before, contactless is a very big thing for my industry at this moment, but I would be really interested to hear about the other industries if they're implementing that
So as for the fashion industry, I think that it's going to be a major trend that's going to be like COVID-19 has impacted it to progress. So there's in terms of fashion in general. So like I would like to talk specifically about cosmetics. In South Korea, they've already started in makeup stores like a screen where it's basically AR where you can see yourself with the makeup products on the screen, and it's working really well. One way this would mean that there'd be less workers there because they've obviously have to social distance, and then it's also for your health and safety because you can't trial makeup products that other people have tried, especially in the pandemic. And so I think that and also like virtual fashion shows have happened a lot recently over the past couple months, and I'm very sure that it's going to grow. Like the whole fashion industry moving online is going to grow over the next couple of years.
Yeah. I think for my industry, for the corporate learning space, I think it's a little bit different, but I think that contactless will definitely continue in the sense that right now, obviously, a lot of people can't go to their offices and whatnot, and so instead, any sort of mentorship or any similar sort of scheme will have to continue online. And I think that even once we can go back into offices and whatnot, I think contactless will still sort of continue because it's a lot more practical. It's much more flexible and it's easy to move around in your schedule. If you have a call that's online, you can do from anywhere. It's much easier to move that around than if you have to be in an office, for example. So I think that's something that'll continue in the sort of corporate learning phase too.
Joel, actually, I have a question for Joel, if you don't mind, Sean.
Sure.
So with the CLOs, I realized that often they are the ones who liaison with a lot of the training providers and the talent development professionals. So in the case of sort of internships and sort of gaining work experience, what do you think the role of CLOs might be in the future with the development through this pandemic?
So let me get this straight. So you're asking about what I think the CLO's job is going to do in regards to internship development during the pandemic?
So with the pandemic, a lot of internships, in-person internships are not as feasible, right? So sort of with this development, a lot of tech, a lot of virtual internships. What is basically what might change for a CLO to organize such internships?
So I think I would actually say that the role at its core remains largely the same. It's coordinating everything and making sure that the whole system, it's putting together the system and making sure it all works as it should. And I think the only difference there is that instead of maybe being able to gather a group of people in a conference room, and then having someone present or organizing several one-on-one sessions, you'll just do that over various online platforms. And I think actually now they'll start to it'll create a bigger market for these platforms that help schedule things, which is sometimes an issue, because the CLO might not have visibility on everyone's schedule. So I think that's something that's a new sort of role that CLOs might have, but I think the core of it remains largely the same in that particular case.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. We've got a really, really interesting question. I mean, recently on social media, there was a huge uproar when there were talks of Donald Trump banning TikTok in the US. So this question is directed to Sham. Big tech is so powerful. Do you agree with Donald Trump's decision to ban TikTok?
Yes. And why I say that is because, let's just have a look at China. And this isn't the first time it's happening. Lots of their phone brands have been banned, not just in the US, but all over the world. And I think this needs to happen because, I know my thing is talking about firms, right? I think I'm just going to move it over a bit to the actual scale of these actual states. Now, China as a country, many countries are relying on China for many reasons, right? Which is why it's so hard for one singular country to act on its own against China. But what we're seeing now is the UK acting. We're seeing other states in Asia acting. We're seeing Australia acting. We're seeing the US acting. And once they all act on their at the exact same time, that leaves China in a situation where they actually have to make change as well. Because if we look at what's happening in China, they have placed tariffs and everything that you can imagine on all of these foreign firms, but they still allow their Chinese firms in all of these states all around the world. So I think this is sort of an awakening for China to say, okay, it's time to make a change. So yeah, I think it's.
I have a follow up. So maybe if I was to sort of try and counter that, I could probably easily go on the argument that China might be collecting a lot of data, and you've accounted for that power of China, which is definitely growing. It's a huge force, etc. But what about power of other sort of nations? I could almost say that the U.S. is just growing its own little bubble, and China is definitely tracking. But some people might even argue that China was just caught red-handed, whereas maybe other nation states weren't. But there is a lot of tracking, especially with things like the Snowden sort of incident that happened a few years ago, which really exposed the U.S. government for the level of tracking that they had over its own citizens. Are there parallels here? Because China also blocks a bunch of sort of Western media like Snapchat and Instagram and whatnot. So could you maybe just draw parallels and say that they're actually playing the same game?
Yeah, exactly. I actually think that's a really good point that you made, because it's not exclusive to China. I think you're right. Maybe it's happening in a much larger extent in China, but every single country in the world is happening. That actually leads over to what I was talking about. So these tech MNCs erode the sovereignty of these states. How? Well, personal information. Right? It is so valuable now, and it's become to such an extent where we have these foreign firms that are holding information about these people in foreign states, right? And obviously that leads to a state to actually want to think, okay, I want my people I want the information of my people being held in a local space with a local firm. So that's what they're doing. They're allowing their local firms to grow. They're going to leave out these, foreign firms so that this sovereignty erosion can't happen, right? So, but I think you're right. It is happening in literally every state as of now, but maybe just a little bit more in China. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
I would want to. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Ashir, you very visibly disagreed with Sean when he answered that. Oh, I agree that it was a good idea. What's your reasoning behind that? Why do you disagree with what Sean thinks?
Although Sean did raise a very good argument, I think some industries and some things cannot be put under protectionism. And I think technology is what connects us from all over the world. So I don't think that you could sort of place that under protectionism. I mean, it's not like, I don't know, tomatoes or something,
Ashira, wouldn't you say the fact that big tech companies have so much influence and the ability to connect so many people, wouldn't you say that in turn sort of, it shows the amount of influence that they have, and that shows that they might perhaps need some form of regulation or protectionism?
You're right. I actually didn't think about that. However, actually, that is a very good point.
Personally, I believe that I'm the kind of person that believes that when change sort of comes, and this is very observable in tech. When this sort of change comes, revolutionary change, it's really quite almost futile to try and stop it, and it doesn't make much sense to sort of say try and stop the internet. It's going to go everywhere, and there's no point really trying to stop it from spreading, in a sense, if you see what I'm trying to say. Would you guys say that actually maybe in regards to the future, maybe decentralized options might become more popular because they create that anonymity that you don't have with current tech, which is why state actors are able to collect so much personal data? Would decentralized solutions be something that we can sort of potentially look forward to as a solution to this? Shyam,
Yes.
what do you think? Or Shira?
Yes, job. Yeah, I think that is a very good option. I think at this point we don't have that many options. That's why we didn't really think of that. But when you brought up that option, I think that's a very good idea. Plus, I remember someone mentioning in our past discussion that now consumers themselves have the option of selling their data and being able to profit from it rather than these anonymous big large corporations that we have no idea who they are.
There's like increasingly, I think there's a few startups and projects and open source projects here and there that are cropping up, which are actually harnessing that blockchain and decentralized sort of logic to try and replicate systems that we have. I know that someone replicated sort of Twitter platform on blockchain, so essentially it's completely anonymous and decentralized. Whereas, but it's like pretty much the same as Twitter, which is like pretty interesting as we move forward. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. To build on from this, we have this question. Do we have a situation that every country will end up making their own version of WhatsApp, TikTok, and Google, and all these big tech firms because of politics and nationalistic leaders? Do you think this could potentially impact other industries as well?
I feel the world's come to such a point. Firstly, I personally believe you can't compare something like Google to something like TikTok. It's just on two different stages. But now, say TikTok, I would agree. Yes, I feel it's coming to a point where, and we're seeing this change. Instagram, it has something called Reels or something, if I'm not wrong. They're all coming up with their own variations so that, again, to get a piece of the cake. But this, like something like Google, is every second person of the world uses it. Say tomorrow, if India comes up with its own thing, yes, even if it's successful, the brand image, the brand value Google's created for itself over the past decades, I feel it's too big to be defeated. So yeah.
I just have an observation. I know that tech sovereignty has become a sort of a rising issue in the EU agenda fairly recently, I think about a month ago. I know that they sort of developed a new initiative called Gaia X, I assume, because they wanted to move away from sort of Amazon and Google, because those are some of like the biggest cloud computing companies, and I think in this case it might be applicable.
I mean, yeah, of course. And actually, I mean, in terms of what I was speaking about in the start, I was saying for whatever service you have, there'll always be another firm that can actually give you that service as well. However, what if you had a firm in this state that is taken advantage of scaling to such an extent where they're not only good at producing that service so well to offer such a cheap price, but they can actually move out, whereby a country like a firm like Tencent can acquire the Southeast Asian movie sites and so on like that. And it's the sense that in the future we won't be seeing these smaller firms each making their own niche markets. We'll be seeing one macro firm in each state that can produce the whole lot, in my opinion.
Do you think, Sean, that's potentially dangerous to just have one firm?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, and that's why we actually have the state. I mean, yes, I mean, I see where you're coming from. One firm could control the whole market, but keep in mind, imagine you're in your country, right? Would you rather have one firm that looks over everyone's information, so on, or would you rather have firms from all over the world, a firm from China, a firm from somewhere else, looking at your people's information? I mean, which one would you rather have?
I'll second Sham's opinion with an example. In India, there's this the telecommunications were handled by all the big companies called Vodafone and Airtel and everything. Then India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani, the owner of Reliance, came up with something called Jio. 2 years in a row, he sold free SIM cards to everyone. People were wondering, how is he even surviving with these big losses? But then the third year, people saw that now today he's the king of the telecommunications market in India. Wi-Fi, he's just growing every second day. So I completely agree that whoever provides the service in a cheaper way can actually capture the market with time.
I think that links really well to like the fashion industry because one thing that people predict for the future post COVID is that sort of fast fashion is gonna slowly like die, not really die, but slow down, and slow fashion is gonna become more like the trend. But then it's interesting to raise that in comparison to what you guys have been talking about, because if you're talking about the fact that these large firms that can produce things at a cheaper price are going to get the consumers to get want their stuff, then slow fashion wouldn't really be where the fashion industry is going. But the thing is, everyone's predicting now that the fashion industry is going to move towards slow fashion and not fast fashion. So is it maybe like, is the fashion industry just that one exemption to what we've been talking about, or is it like the other way around?
Okay. Thank you, guys. This has been such an insightful discussion. We have another really interesting question over here for Avikna. After a COVID-19 vaccine has been created, how do we decide who gets access to a vaccine first? Do you think our healthcare supply chains are efficient enough to support populations?
So supply chain management comes hand in hand with a lot of data analytics, and predictive data analytics. They analyze areas that are sort of, in this case of a pandemic, they analyze areas that are at risk. So I feel that sort of analyzing where the vaccine might be needed, that can be done through our supply chain, but actually getting it at a fast rate at the sort of the state that our supply chains are in right now might be sort of a challenge. But as I said, a lot of the manual inventory systems, they serve as a large challenge to a lot of the supply chains in healthcare. So I feel like in the future, as we sort of integrate more tech, more automation into the industry, it will make it a lot more easier for the supply chain to be more developed and getting the actual distribution of vaccines and medicines through.
I have a quick question for you, Vigna. So for something like a global pandemic, you need to be able to distribute the vaccine everywhere, on a global scale. I'm wondering, where would you place the responsibility to sort of build a more robust supply chain? Because, a lot of nations might not actually have a lot of infrastructure, and infrastructure generally, really supports a healthy supply chain. But who can we sort of look to when a country doesn't have enough infrastructure? Do we blame the government, or are there other bodies that come into play that maybe also play a part?
So I assume you're asking how the supply chain might be able to cope when there's a lack of infrastructure to develop it?
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
That comes down to integration. So integration is one of the biggest challenges in the supply chain industry. A lot of it struggles not only between tech and supply chains, but specific management systems within each supply chain. They struggle to sort of integrate and communicate with each other. And that's sort of one of the biggest problems that is facing the supply chain management industry. But I'd say it comes down to individual firms and the tech they have and the incentive that each of them have under their profit motive to integrate with these supply chains and sort of develop a more robust system that would benefit both parties. I think that's what would sort of drive that development rather than individual sort of the government rather than just the government as a whole.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a follow-up for Sham as well. I'm sorry, for Avikna. That, like, say once the vaccine comes out, do you think that'll lead to like an immediate post-vaccine time? Do you think that lead to, say, a political crisis in terms of which countries get the vaccine and which don't? Like, when the vaccine starts to get distributed, say a country gets left out for whatever reason, someone will have to be prioritized, be it for whatever reason. Others will raise fingers. So do you think you see a political crisis here that might have other repercussions as well?
I think that's dependent upon which country develops the vaccine. There are certain key figures that if they do develop the vaccine, there will be sort of that political friction between which countries do get the vaccine first, despite of sort of the state of risk that they're at. So yeah, I would agree that there'd probably be some sort of political friction that would exist. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, guys. Before we continue, it's so great to see that our viewers are starting to ask us questions and get interested as much as we are in our topics. Before we continue with the discussion, I'd like to turn our attention back to the rapid fire round to start getting some more different ideas to start bouncing around. So if you guys are ready, we'll get started with the new group of questions. So let's get started. Do you currently, or are you willing to boycott businesses that don't align with your beliefs? Do you think that now is a time for major disruption in your industries? Do you think that technology and AI runs the risk of impersonalization in your industry? Do you agree that businesses should have involvement in politics? Thank you very much, guys. So let's jump back into the discussion, and I'm so excited to see you guys collaborate and discuss with each other, and I'm so glad to continue to see our viewers joining in and asking us some really, really interesting and insightful questions. So let's continue. This question is for Raj. As a university student, I'm now starting to open my own bank account. What are cool things that banks are doing to cater to young Gen Zs?
Of course. So as a university student as well, I opened my own bank account, say, a year ago. I was looking for the same thing. So some things I really came across was that, say, I'll take a few examples here. What's important for millennials and Gen Zs are like, say, a cool onboard recollection with a brand name. So like these big companies, OCBC, they're coming up with sub-brands. Like OCBC has its own sub-brand called Frank. So as a millennial Gen Z, first thing, you need a good stylish name, something that appeals to you. Apart from names, what again OCBC did, that their physical presence was in millennial-centric areas. They opened their branches in university campuses. Then something different we're seeing nowadays is that, let's take another country, for example, a place like Korea. They have a bank called Kakao. This place, they have their user interface is integrated with cartoons, which resonates with people, striking immediate appeal to them. And I think one particular thing I also find cool, if you would say, is that what's important for banks to realize, again, personalization, that again, services are similar nowadays, but it's just the way you understand your customer and you give them that service. So yeah, whichever bank helps you in personalizing what you need is one thing that you should go for.
Raj, in terms of catering to the younger generation, do you think that micro demographic analysis, do you think that plays a bigger part in younger generations than it does to sort of older generations, simply because millennials and Gen Z, they're a fairly diverse generation. You know, millennials, there's some who were sort of graduating during the economic recession. There are some who are now starting families. So with it being so diverse, do you think that micro demographics might play a bigger part?
Definitely, I do agree with this, because people say boomers and Gen X's were similar in nature. They didn't have much demands here and there, but microdemographic study is so important nowadays, because a millennial studying here in Singapore and a millennial studying somewhere in the US might have different needs. Even though, yes, they're all part of digital native generation, but yes, they have so many different, like their cultures are different, the way they're brought up is different. Yes, a study of microdemographics is so important, and it is only via that banks in these particular countries or sectors can achieve the big vote of millennials.
Thank you, guys. Another question about COVID. It's so interesting to see how COVID has really changed the lives we lead. It's undeniable that it's had a huge impact on us. So continuing on this discussion, with the current focus that we have on COVID right now, what impact do you see on pre-COVID trends, such as database predictive healthcare and AI-based diagnosis and other pre-COVID trends?
So database predictive healthcare, with the pandemic, it has been definitely sped up, because we've had to deal not only with a drug shortage and an equipment shortage, and also a data shortage. So when it comes to a drug shortage, these database healthcare systems, they're needed to ensure to do something called population health management. So that essentially means that you monitor the quality of health within a certain area, and that's very important to ensure that populations as a whole remain healthy, and you can sort of use that to identify at-risk areas for COVID-19.
Thank you, Avigna. This question is directed towards Sham. The future office is going to be highly tech-enabled with distancing and wellness in place, etc. Is there a company you see that is currently winning that race?
Yeah, so in terms of this question, I would say that the workplace, in terms of what that looks like this now. It looks like what we're doing now, as in us having these talks. I could be in Australia, you could be in Singapore, right? And why firms are doing this is because it's cheaper, it's faster, it's just more efficient as a whole. Now, in terms of the firms which are actually winning at this, it's not the largest firms who are at scale who can afford this, because these pieces of tech like this, the smallest firms in the market and the largest firms can leverage off the same thing. However, in terms of the fund that I would say is winning, so Jeff Bezos recently spent $4 billion in the last financial quarter just on mitigating the effects of COVID on his firm. And what that looked like, it looked like sending safety equipment to every single one of his workers and so on. But I think, yes, you can assure the health of them. But in terms of keeping apart, I don't actually think you would need to in a workspace, because we have this affordable tech like this here, which is available, which is, for literally everything.
Thank you, Sham. I have a question for Joao that's come. What is an example of a company that has a really strong L&D strategy? So what are they doing that is making them so successful?
Okay, so one of the best companies with a great L&D strategy is Unilever, and so obviously they're a great, they're a really big MNC, and they're a global leader in the FMCG space. So they have access to a lot of resources, and their investment in L&D really shows, because their L&D program is very thorough. They have, and I think the two most key factors is that they have consistent, thorough, regular reviews that work and are well planned out and thought out and organized. And then they also have tried to establish a system of accountability. So what they have done, which I thought was really great, is they actually have a sort of skill tree for teams, specialized teams. And what that lets you do is that sort of lets you track progress of each employee over time. And every time you do a review, you look at those skills, and then you can sort of compare different reviews. And that gives way to this huge accountability, which really generates progress, I think. I think that's one of the things that really helps. And beyond that, they support their employees through, their own internal leadership management programs, as well as programs in other areas, as well as supporting them through external programs. So they might partially or completely fund their employees through external third-party programs, which help develop these particular skills. And their investment in their employees really shows, because Unilever employees tend to have much more success after having spent their formative years within Unilever too.
Now, Unilever is quite a large firm that at scale, lots of money to spend on this kind of stuff. Now, would you say for corporate learning to happen, I mean, from what it sounds like, it's sort of like this virtuous cycle. Firm has lots of resources, can then spend on learning. Is that a cycle which is happening? Can small firms actually have that same experience?
I think that's a really big issue, which is corporate learning is really too often overlooked. When you start different initiatives that might need more resources, you put more resources into marketing, put more resources into this, into that, and sort of the one that's always left behind is going to be learning. And I think that actually learning should be should be used way more often, because it helps to optimize your company. And when you optimize the company and sort of it becomes more productive, in the long run, it's really quite beneficial. But it's trying to make the invisible visible, because often the effects of the corporate learning are quite hard to tell, because they're not as quantifiable as other things might be, such as, say, revenue or profit margins. The metrics for corporate learning are typically quite arbitrary, and so that makes it much harder to sort of get a sense for how efficient your program is. Yeah.
So building on from this, Joao, businesses, as our businesses during and after COVID, willing to hire a corporate learning expert when during the pandemic they're feeling the need to cut down on cost. Do you see that corporate learning is something that businesses are prioritizing, or do you see it as something that's being cut down during this?
I think it's definitely being cut down. Typically, when companies look to cut costs, the first place they'll look is the sort of learning space, because it can be quite cost intensive at times, depending on the extensiveness of the given L&D program. But I think that after in the post COVID-19 sort of situation, where companies might be struggling to sort of sort out their finances, I think a lot of them will not really be sort of willing to hire a corporate learning expert. But I think especially because SMEs constitute a pretty large share of enterprises across the globe, and I think those are going to be the ones who cut down on the learning most. And I think even if they don't have the budget necessarily to sort of sustain a corporate learning expert, which may well be the case, they don't necessarily have to do that, because sometimes they need to put their money in other things. I think even if they don't have the budget to sustain such an expert, I think they should still try and, as much as possible, have at least a basic level, set a sufficient baseline in terms of learning. And that doesn't always involve an expert, but there are other options that are worth looking into, and that's a space where I think there's a pretty big market which hasn't quite been captured. Sort of smaller, cheaper consultancy options, perhaps. Things like that. I think that's a pretty big market for companies who don't necessarily have the budget, but I think it's still definitely worth putting some money in.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry, guys. This question is directed towards Ashira. During COVID-19, especially during lockdown, food and beverage delivery has been something that a lot of people have been relying on to get their meals every day. How do you see that large food and or any food and beverage delivery companies have been coping with the huge demand that they are experiencing?
So for areas that previously they did not have such a large reach on, they did extend about 10 kilometers wider than they used to. And a lot of people at this time who have lost their jobs are seeing that this could be a potentially good industry to work in. So they are signing up there are more people signing up to be delivery workers. And so actually 200% more, there are 200% more orders than there were before the pandemic. So I think a lot of these companies, especially GrabFood, Foodpanda, are doing a really good job in increasing their reach and just having more 24-hour information centers.
I think before when we were discussing previously, you had mentioned that like one way that firms were these companies like Foodpanda and Grab Delivery were getting people to sign up to be food delivery workers was giving them like fringe benefits. Do you want to maybe like talk about that?
Yeah, as Sohana previously mentioned, that now the younger generations are more empathetic towards workers at a lower level than they were used to. So now companies are being quite careful, and fortunately, for example, there are more fringe benefits for the delivery workers than there were before. For example, they have insurance or paid leave for 14 days, but it depends on each company. It's a case by case thing.
So, Ashira, while this virus has been happening, I mean, yes, there's been lots more volume for these firms, right? That's easy to say. How about after the virus? How do you think these firms are going to keep people using their services even once, they may not even, need to use them anymore?
Well, a lot of I know what you mean is that some people are craving that feeling of experiencing dining out. However, we do see that in some places, even when in Malaysia we had the MCO, which is the movement control order, and then after that we had the CMCO, which is a control movement conditional movement control order, and surprisingly people were still ordering the same amount that they were beforehand, even though there was a relaxation of rules and regulations. So I think in the future this isn't really something that we should be worried about.
Thank you very much. Time has really, really flown by today, and I've been so completely absorbed in the discussion. I think let's take on one more last question before we start to close off. This one is a really interesting one. Do you see cryptocurrency or digital currency playing a major role in your respective industries in the future? Jump in when you're ready, guys.
So, so perhaps in my industry, it's sort of, I think it's quite difficult to say. Although one thing that I think is worth mentioning and could perhaps play some sort of role eventually in this space, is there's very recently there's been a new browser. Some of you might have heard of it. It's called Brave, and actually it has it's created its own cryptocurrency called BAT. So that's the basic attention token, and that the idea of that is to sort of revolutionize how advertising works. So you pay users in basic attention tokens to pay attention to your ads. Users can reward publishers for good content using their attention tokens, and this cryptocurrency can be exchanged for actual say US dollars. And so that's just one sort of application that is sort of changing a lot, and that's in the advertising space, which is not necessarily to do with corporate learning. Although I think that's sort of it's a proof of concept, I guess, in some ways. In that if you can apply it in advertising, how else can we apply it? That I feel like that opens so many new possibilities and some pretty interesting ideas that maybe could follow through in light of that in the corporate learning sort of sector, I think. Yeah.
Supply chain management is it's a fairly back-end industry. So with cryptocurrency, on the side of the supply chain management industry, I don't necessarily think it plays such a big part. But with healthcare, on the other hand, I feel like in the future, it could definitely play a much bigger role. It could play a much more important and a larger role in the future.
I think quick question. Maybe I'm curious. What kind of application could a cryptocurrency have? Could a cryptocurrency have in healthcare?
Other than a form of transaction, I'd say perhaps used in certain apps, predictive analytics apps. But off the top of my head, I can't really think of much. Mainly as a form of transaction, I'd say, as they gain popularity.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. So yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. Before we do some closing statements, I'd love to give the people who have asked questions some quick answers. So if we treat them as rapid fire questions and give us our quick yes/no answers to the following two questions. Is coding a useful skill to learn for all industries? Yeah, that's the question. Okay, thank you. Can anyone, do you guys think that COVID-19 has possibly been a good thing for humanity? Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. I'd also like to ask you guys one final question before we close. What is one factor, key factor for success in your industry? Thank you very much, guys. If we could have a quick sentence from you guys, possibly to give our viewers a better idea of why you've chosen this course. So let's go around, maybe just one sentence or two at the most. Let's start with Sean.
Okay, so with assurance, I think that's exactly what consumers want when you have all these people who have access to your information. So yeah.
So I think recognition is really important because I think corporate learning has been far too overlooked, and I think it needs to be recognized for its value.
I just think that everyone needs to be compassionate because obviously people who are making the clothes are going through their own difficulties, and the companies themselves are going through their own difficulties. And so just later in the future, we just need to be aware about that there's always like two sides to a story.
So my word was actually collaboration. So that comes into basically integration within supply chains. Communication is very important in supply chain management because individual systems of distribution, manufacturing, there's a very large disconnect between them. So collaboration and integration of these specific entities and sort of forming one large organization as all collaborating with each other will sort of increase sort of the cost effectiveness and the effectiveness of the process as a whole.
So I chose quick adaptability because that's the one thing that is helping local restaurants survive by collaborating with the digital delivery industry, which they haven't had.
I went with personalization because banks have made their fortunes long enough being stereotypical in nature. Millennials and Gen Zs are different, they're unique. So if they want to continue doing that, they have to personalize.
Thank you very much, guys. I think I speak for all the panelists when I say this has been such a great opportunity and a huge learning experience. Thank you so much for engaging with us today. It was so great to hear from you guys, to hear questions and your thoughts. So again, thank you to you guys as well. So we hope to continue to see this project grow in the future, and I hope to see myself continue to be a part of it. Thank you very much, guys. Good evening.